Hi everyone, you are watching Commerce King Academy right now. In this video, we are going to discuss about chapter number 6, name accounting for bills of exchange. Alright. So we were in last video or last lesson on the topic the dryer have 4 options after drawing bill of exchange on dry. Alright. After accepting the acceptance by the dryer, the dryer may have 4 options. The dryer retain the bill till date maturity or due date. Alright, we have already discussed to this point. The second point was the dryer may have option to discount the bill from bank, and we have also discussed to this concept. Alright, so in this video we are going to discuss about latest point, which is point number 3, endorsement of a bill of exchange. The third option opens to the dryer is to endorse the bill in favor of one of his creditors from whom he has already purchased goods on credit for settlement of his own debts. Under this case, his creditor will take the possession of the bill. On maturity date, he will now present this bill to the acceptor, and acceptor will pay cash to him. After reading this concept, now I am discussing to this concept in very simple or lay words. Listen carefully. The third option opens to the dryer is to endorse the bill in favor of one of his creditors. First thing, I will clear to you that what are the creditors. Creditors are the persons or institutions who lend or give loan or stock to the persons on credit basis. Clear? From whom he has already purchased on credit. Just like this, the dryer already purchased from the persons or from his creditors on credit basis. Alright. So for settlement of his credits or debts, of his own debts, alright, he will use the bills of exchange which he has already in his hand after making acceptance by the dryer. Under this case, his creditor will take the possession of the bill. The dryer will give the bill of exchange to his creditors. Alright. On maturity date, he will now present the bill to the acceptor. His creditors will present the bill on maturity or due date to his acceptor, and acceptor will pay cash to him. So all the transactions will done by this process. Alright. I share to you another example for more understanding about creditors. So listen carefully. Banks lend loans or give loans to the general public or persons. Alright. So when bank give the loan to the person, to any person, so in this case or in this context, so in this situation, the bank will creditor of that person, and that person will called the debtor or receivable for the bank. Understand? You can understand the concept of endorsement in very simple format. For example, Mr. A is the person who draws a bill amounted 10,000, okay, on Mr. B. So in this situation, Mr. B will call the dry acceptor or payer of the bill, and Mr. A is the seller, Mr. B is the purchaser in this situation. Okay. After making signature, stamp or acceptance by Mr. B, return to Mr. A bill of exchange. Mr. A keeps the bill in his hand or in his custody. Alright. In last dates, Mr. A have purchased from Mr. C. This is the third person, and have debt amounted 10,000. Alright. So Mr. C is the creditor of Mr. A. Alright. Because Mr. A purchased goods amounted 10,000, Mr. C. So Mr. A have option that he will endorse or transfer the bill of exchange to Mr. C for clearance of his debts. So Mr. A will clear his debt for transferring of bill of exchange to Mr. C. Alright. In this situation, Mr. A will be endorser, and on the other hand, Mr. C will be endorsee of bill of exchange. So these two parties comes into existence in the context of endorsement. Alright. On maturity date, Mr. C will contact with Mr. B. Alright. So Mr. C will present the bill ahead Mr. B, which is the actual acceptor of the bill of exchange, and Mr. B will make the payment. All the transaction will be done with the help of endorsement. Alright. So let's start with third option or use of bill of exchange, which is endorsement by dryer. Alright. The dryer or holder of bill may endorse or transfer the bill in favor of his creditor for the clearance of his own debts. A bill of exchange is a negotiable instrument, i.e. a document which is transferable by delivery without notice to the party liable dry. Alright. Listen this paragraph in simple words and understand. The dryer is the person who purchased in last dates from an other parties who called the creditor of the dryer. Okay. Creditor is the person who lent or gave the stock on credit basis. Okay. And ultimately the dryer have debt on this party. Okay. Bill of exchange is a document which is easily to transfer to another party, transferable to another party without giving notice to the actual acceptor. Alright. That means there is no need to inform acceptor or dry when we make transfer or endorse the bill of exchange to another person or our creditors. Alright. If the holder of bill of exchange puts his signature on the back of the bill with a view to transfer the property contained in it, right to receive money from the acceptor, then he becomes endorser. Alright. And the person to whom the bill is transferred will become endorsee. Okay. This procedure by which a bill is transferred from one person to another person for settlement of debts is called endorsement. Understand? That means the paragraph said to us in simple words, bill of exchange is the instrument that we will use and we have option to use in our debts clearance, or is the option for the dryer who settle his debts with giving bill of exchange. It will be the alternate of the payment for the dryer. Okay. For example, Mr. A dues a bill of exchange on B for amounted 5,000 rupees, which is accepted by Mr. B at 3 months. Understand? A bought goods from C worth 7,000 on credit basis in last dates. Understand? Now C is the creditor of Mr. A for 7,000 rupees, and Mr. A is liable to pay to Mr. C amounted 7,000 rupees. Understand? So in this situation, Mr. A endorsed the bill in favor of his creditor Mr. C for paying his debt up to extent of rupees 5,000. Thus, C is now creditor of Mr. A up to extent of 2,000 only. So 7,000 minus 5,000 equal to 2,000 will be the balance or remaining credit of Mr. C toward Mr. A, because 5,000 will clear by giving the bill of exchange to Mr. C by Mr. A. Now C is the holder of bill of exchange, or we can say in simple words is a new holder of bill of exchange. alright, which he has got from Mr. A. Being holder of bill of exchange, C has all four options before him. That means C has all four options when he become a new holder of bills of exchange. First option he may wait till maturity or due date of bill of exchange, and the second option he may got toward bank for discounting. The third option he may endorse to further any other person, just like for settlement of his debt. Okay, the fourth option that will be discussed in our next video, which is sent for collection to bank, not a discounting. Okay, and he may retain the bill till the due date. Okay, on due date he will present the bill to the acceptor and receive cash from him. So what happened next? One important point that we should remember is whenever a bill is discounted or endorsed, it will not be considered as the property or asset of the person who has discounted or endorsed it, and the bill receivable account is written off, neutralized, as it is no longer receivable. That means when the person or dryer who may endorse or discounted the bill from bank. So understand here what is the concept of written off of bills receivable account. Written off means closing off the account. You can see here, when dryer receive a bill of exchange from dry after making acceptance by dry, so the entry will be bills receivable account debit. Am I right? To Mr. B account credit. With details or description, acceptance received. Alright. So this receivable account will automatically or ultimately will close or write off. You can see when dryer will endorse the bill, the entry will be endorsee account will debit to bills receivable account will credit. With details or description, endorsement of bill of exchange by dryer. Okay, you can see here the bills receivable account is written off here. So what happened next? However, there is one possibility in which he can still be affected by the bill, i.e. the person liable primarily to the bill is acceptor, who has accepted the obligation to pay. Suppose he does not honor the bill on due or maturity date, then the person who endorsed this bill will be liable to pay. So this is a contingent liability of the endorser until the bill is honored by the acceptor. That means the endorser has the liability to pay the payment to endorsee in case of the actual acceptor dishonor the bill. Alright? An endorsed bill is contingent liability of endorser. Okay? For example, on maturity date, C presented the bill to the acceptor B, but he refused to make payment. C will receive the payment from endorser, who is the Mr. A. So, A has to take up the liability, and in turn, Mr. A will receive the amount from Mr. B. So, what would be the entries of the parties, endorser and as well as endorsee journal? So you can see here, when bill is endorsed by Mr. A, so the journal entry would be in the accounts of endorser or Mr. A. Endorsee account will debit to bills receivable account credited. Okay, and on maturity date, no journal entry will be in the journal of endorser. So when we will talk about The second party, endorsee journal, who is Mr. C, when he receives the bill of exchange from Mr. A, he will be the endorsee of the bill of exchange, and the entries would be in the journal of endorsee account with receivable account debit, because the receivable account is the asset for the endorsee or Mr. C, because he will receive the amount of bill of exchange from Mr. B, who is the dry of the bill of exchange or acceptor or payer of the bill of exchange. And bills receivable account debited here, to endorser's account credited here. Okay. So on the due date, the bill is presented to the acceptor and cash is received from him. The entry will be cash account debit to bills receivable account credit, because the account of Mr. C debited by cash, okay, and decrease in bills receivable account will credit. Bills receivable account credited here. Reason behind: the endorsee Mr. C received the payment from actual acceptor or payer of bill of exchange, which was Mr. B. So the bills receivable account credit. Why? Because decrease in asset will fall in credit. When decrease in assets, so ultimately include or fall in credit. Dear students, after understanding the whole concept behind endorsement of bill of exchange as its parties and entries into the accounts of different parties, endorser as well as endorsee, we are here on relevant illustration with above concept, which is illustration number 3. So let's get started. Mr. Asif sold goods to Rauf valued amounted 15,000 on 1st January 2005 for a credit of 2 months duration or period of payment. In simple words, Mr. Asif is manufacturer, seller who sold goods to Mr. Rauf on credit basis amounted 15,000 rupees on 1st January. The time period of payment is 2 months. Alright. Mr. Rauf is the customer here. What happened next? Mr. Asif drew and Rauf accepted a bill for rupees 15,000 at 2 months on same date. In simple words, Mr. Asif, which is the supplier, manufacturer or seller of the goods, makes or writes a bill of exchange and immediately on same date draws on Mr. Rauf. Mr. Rauf will be the dry, acceptor and payer of the amount. Okay. He makes acceptance on the face of the bill with the signature and stamp, and after that return to Mr. Asif. Mr. Asif, who is the dryer of the bill, retain the bill on his hand and call the holder of the bills of exchange. Alright. So what happened next? Mr. Farooq was creditor of Asif for 15,000 rupees. Understand? Mr. Asif, who is the dryer of the bill of exchange, who already have the credit another party, the party is Mr. Farooq with same amount 15,000 rupees. Clear? So Asif settled his account by endorsing the bill to Farooq on 2nd Jan 2005. Listen carefully and understand the comprehension of this sentence. Mr. Asif wants to settle his debts from Mr. Farooq. Therefore, he endorsed the bill or transferred the bills of exchange on same amount to Mr. Farooq on next day. Date is 2nd Jan 2005. With this conduct, he will settle, Mr. Asif will settle his debts from Mr. Farooq by endorsing or transferring the bill of exchange to Mr. Farooq. Understand? So, on maturity or due date, Mr. Rauf, who is the dry acceptor or customer of the bill of exchange, who have made acceptance on bill of exchange and accepts a liability that he will make a payment on due or maturity date. So Mr. Rauf meet his acceptance on maturity date. Alright. Requirement of this illustration is this: give journal entries in the books of three parties: Mr. Asif, who is the drawer of the bill; Mr. Farooq, who is the endorsee. When we will talk about endorsement, so in this context, Mr. Asif, who is the drawer of the bill of exchange, who endorsed the bill to Mr. Farooq, so Mr. Asif will call the endorser, and on the other hand Mr. Farooq will call the endorsee of the bill, who received the endorsement of Mr. Asif in settlement of his debts. We can say in very simple words, Mr. Asif have to use to bill of exchange as a alternate of in payments for clearance of his debts. Alright. So Mr. Rauf is the party who is the acceptor, payer or customer of the Mr. Asif. Okay. So Mr. Rauf will mature or honor the bill on due date. After understanding whole concept behind endorsement of bill of exchange and as well as its relevant illustration, now we have to solve this illustration. You can see here Mr. Asif journals first. This is the first party who is the drawer of bill of exchange. Alright. The second party of this bill of exchange in endorsement, Mr. Farooq. Okay, we will make the entries in the journal of Farooq. After that, we have to solve the entries of Rauf. This is the third party or drawer of bill of exchange. So let's get started with Mr. Asif journals account first. Alright. On 1st Jan 2005, Mr. Asif sold goods on credit basis to Mr. Rauf. In this context, Mr. Asif will be the drawer, seller or maker or generator of bill of exchange. Okay, first entry would be on sales. So he will make Rauf account first debited here to sales account credit with details or description: goods sold to Rauf for 2 months credit with same amount debit and credit. Am I right? After that, on same date, he receive a bill of exchange from Mr. Rauf. Okay. So entry will be this receivable account will debit to Rauf account credit with same amounts debit and credit with details or description: acceptance received at 2 months. The logic or reason behind for debit bills receivable account, because bills receivable is the asset for Mr. Asif, because he will receive the amount of bills of exchange in future or maturity or due date from Mr. Rauf, who is the acceptor of bill of exchange. Alright. So third entry in the journal of Mr. Asif journal comes into existence when Mr. Asif not retain the bill of exchange till due date or maturity date and used bill of exchange for settlements of his debts from Mr. Farooq. So the entry would be 2nd January 2005. Okay, Farooq account debit, because Mr. Asif reduce or decrease his liability which was payable to Mr. Farooq amounted 15,000 rupees, and bills receivable account credited with same amount because he will decrease in asset by endorsement of bill of exchange to Mr. Farooq. So decrease in assets will entered in credit. Alright, just like bills receivable account. So with details or description, bill was endorsed to Mr. Farooq for the settlement of his debts. Farooq's account is now showing nil balance toward Mr. Asif. This is the short note about this entry, that is decrease in liability Mr. Farooq, okay, and decrease in assets, which is bills receivable account, with the effect of this transaction, which is endorsement of bill of exchange to Mr. Farooq by Mr. Asif. Understand? After completion, the journal's entry of our first party, which is the drawer of bill of exchange. Now we will move toward our next party of bill of exchange, which is Farooq. Farooq is the ex-creditor of Mr. Asif, okay, who received the endorsement of Mr. Asif for settlement of his debt, which was toward Mr. Asif. Okay, so entries would be on 2nd Jan 2005 he received the endorsement from Mr. Asif. So the entry would be this receivable account will debit to Mr. Asif account credit with same amounts, 15,000 debit, 15,000 credit. With details or description, received a bill from Asif in settlement of his debts. Alright, increase in asset bills receivable and decrease in asset debtor, because he makes bills receivable account debit. Bills receivable, he will receive the payment in future. Okay, so bills receivable is asset for Farooq here, right? What are the changes after endorsement of bill of exchange on Mr. Farooq's account? First change, increase in asset bill receivable, because he will receive the payment from Mr. Rauf, who is the acceptor of bill of exchange, in future date. So bills receivable are debit. And reason behind is this decrease in asset debtor. Okay. So Mr. Asif account was the debit or asset for Mr. Farooq. So right now he received a bill of exchange from Mr. Asif instead of cash. So Mr. Asif account will credit, because decrease in asset will fall in credit. I revise the details or description. Received a bill from Asif in settlement of his debts. That's it. So the next entry, on date 4th March 2005, cash account will debit 15,000 rupees to bills receivable account credited here with same amount 15,000 rupees. With details or description, received cash from acceptor on presentation of the bill of exchange. Alright. When Mr. Farooq present on due or majority date the bill of exchange to Mr. Rao, who is the acceptor, payer of the bill of exchange, and receive a cash 15,000 rupees. So this is our last party of bill of exchange. Mr. Rao, who is the dry payer or acceptor of bill of exchange or customer of Mr. Asif, who purchased goods from Mr. Asif on credit basis. Am I right? So entries would be in the journal of Mr. Rauf on 1st January 2005. He purchased goods. So purchases account will debit amounted 15,000 rupees debit to Asif account credited here with same amount 15,000 rupees with details or description, goods purchased on credit basis. That's it. On same date, 1st January 2005, he makes acceptance on the face of bills of exchange with the help of signature and stamp. After that, he returned the bill to Mr. Asif, okay, and promised to make payment on future or majority date. Am I right? So the entry would be Mr. Asif account debited here with same amount 15,000 rupees to bills payable account credited with 15,000 rupees with details or description, acceptance given payable after 2 months. So the next entry, when he will pay the cash, this is the date of maturity or due date. Okay, so the entry will be in the accounts of Rauf's journal when he makes a payment and honor the bill of exchange. His payable account will debit amounted 15,000 to cash account credited with same amount 15,000 rupees with details or description, acceptance made and cash paid to holder of the bill, which is Mr. Farooq. He is the new holder of bill of exchange who or instead of cash when he receive a payments the liabilities of both persons Mr. Rauf and Mr. Asif has been cleared in the eyes of Mr. Farooq, who is the new endorsee of the bills of exchange or holder of the new holder of bill of exchange, making after endorsement of bill of exchange. Bill is honored by the acceptor. Clear? So, dear students, all the entries and concepts related to the endorsement of bill of exchange has been cleared now. So in next video we will see with the next concept, which is bill sent to the bank for collection. This is the fourth option for the holder or dryer of the bill of exchange. We will discuss its concepts, entries, its relevant illustration. This is the illustration number 4. So stay with Commerce King Academy and we'll see the Commerce King Academy. If you have any ambiguity or confusion, so please contact in comment section and you may contact on WhatsApp number. If you like this video, then don't forget share, subscribe and comment. Thank you all.